Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here with you today at the Maine Inclusion Conference. I want to take a moment by thanking Hamza and his incredible team for making today possible. Yes. So, as I was just introduced, my name is David Sanchez Aguilera, and my work focuses on helping organizations of all sizes redesign their core systems, which includes hiring, onboarding, performance management, and benefit selection, so that inclusion is not an afterthought, but rather the default process. While my focus the past 8 years has been on organizational transformation through the lens of HR, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge all of the different professionals in this room, including the folks from nonprofit, DE&I, local, state, and government, and business leaders. So while my perspective does come from the HR perspective, my hope is that the message is universally applicable. Perfect. I'm just going to hopefully get this going. Oh my God, we got it. Okay, great. Oh, it's okay. I'll just leave it there. So I do want to take a moment to just address the present moment that we are in, which is one where we are being both challenged in this inclusion space, diversity, equity, and inclusion space, whatever we're calling it these days, and we're also being asked to continue that work. So while we have to navigate shifting regulatory landscapes and changing compliance expectations, rising demand for equitable workplaces as well, there is at the same time a call for restraint. So these are obviously opposing forces, and today's talk is really about how we deal with that contradiction and how we make space in contradiction, how we make meaning in collapse, and how we kind of form and forge through that through community. So I do want to start with a core idea that might sound simple but holds a radical truth, which is that inclusion doesn't happen between the lines, rather it happens in the lines. So inclusion doesn't happen, when we write a fabulous DE&I mission statement or, even a roadmap. It happens with the workflows, the forms, the policies, those ordinary and often invisible or quotidian moments where our systems really declare who belongs and who does not through their lived experiences of our structures. So whether that's a job posting that assumes English as a default when English is not necessarily a main aspect of the role, or a performance rubric that privileges assertiveness over collaboration. It could be a benefits enrollment system that only recognizes the nuclear family model. These are all, not neutral decisions. They are design choices, and every design decision either welcomes or it excludes. So as leaders, we sit at the center of these systems. We are the architects of the human experience lifecycle that we oversee, and that gives us both power and responsibility. So inclusion is not about being nice or progressive, it's about how we build worlds. So let me give you a real example. Maine's Office of New Americans is working to embed inclusion into the pipelines that feed critical sectors like healthcare and education. Instead of asking immigrant professionals to retrofit themselves into outdated credentialing systems, they're redesigning those systems to meet people where they are. And that includes increasing language access, increasing training pathways, and coordinating policy that centers equity. So this is not charity, it's strategic, inclusive design. When we treat inclusion as an add-on or an afterthought, we build systems that cannot hold the workforce that we have, let alone the workforce that we need. But when we bake inclusion into the structure, we build retention, trust, and long-term advantage. So I want to make this a bit reeled together. What are the forms in your organization that could speak more clearly to belonging? What assumptions are buried in your onboarding documents, your performance tools, or your policy manuals? Because every system and each human touch point is telling a story to our employees, to our customers, and to our stakeholders. So let's make sure that that's one that says you belong here. One of the biggest barriers to equity work, I would say, is the tendency to add a layer, a checkbox, a DE&I paragraph, this kind of incremental approach that shies away from rebuilding. But here's the truth. You cannot retrofit your way into inclusion. Equity requires more than patchwork fixes. It requires redesign, intentional forward-facing design that anticipates the needs of today's workforce. And I want to stress that this isn't a moral case, it's a business one, especially in the context of artificial intelligence, as you were saying, aging populations, and the level of disruption that we really haven't seen on this scale before. So returning to Maine, the Office of New Americans is collaborating with business councils, immigrant professionals, and state agencies to build onboarding pathways for foreign trained workers in sectors like healthcare where shortages are critical. And so this is not just inclusion, it's survival for both communities and organizations. They're not just translating orientation manuals or adding cultural trainings, they're restructuring the entire credentialing pipeline. They're designing systems that recognize prior experience, language access or language mastery, and cross-sector support in expanded registers. And this is the kind of creative thinking that we need to be doing. So this is the shift from assimilation to anticipatory strategic inclusion. And the data backs up that it works. So states with immigrant workforce integration strategies report higher labor alignment, stronger retention, and lower recruitment costs over time. So this is not a political agenda, it's workforce planning in its truest form. I do want to take a moment to be clear, though, that the work has become politicized, right? It's become a lightning rod, and I do want to say that laying low is not the solution. So we've seen a lot of corporations that have just taken the duck and hide approach. And what we need right now is to recommit and expand the communities that we are in, because those will be the ones that sustain us and our dream and world-making capabilities in the long term. So looking at your own organization or your own venture, redesign might mean revisiting your apprenticeship programs, reevaluating your job ladders, or collaborating with local colleges or advocacy groups to build career bridges and identify local talent. One of the things that I like to ask leaders is, when I'm consulting with them, if you could rebuild the system from scratch without legacy constraints, what approach would you take? And then, start with piloting one small part of that. Because redesign is not about being perfect or idealistic, it's about being intentional and strategic. Because patching up old systems leaves us with brittle infrastructures. So again, we just need to design for the workforces and the populations that we have, both in our workforce and in our communities, acknowledging all of the differences across race, gender, immigration, ability, nationality, et cetera, and moving from retrofitting to future-proofing. So the takeaway is this: integration is not an afterthought, it's a design opportunity. So I want to shift gears a little bit now to talk about something that's quite simple but extremely powerful, which is presence. So inclusion begins not with policy but with presence, I would argue. It's our ability to pause and notice what's actually happening in the room, and to resist defaulting to urgency, hierarchy, or habit. Because when we're not present, we don't design, and we repeat, or worse, react. Just gonna hit Big green button. Okay, let's take a look. Okay, we got it. Awesome. So I borrow here from the wisdom of Dr. Tara Brach, who is a psychologist and best-selling author in her field, who teaches us that presence is the portal to imagination. When we are truly present, we remember that the person in front of us has value, dignity, a story, and when we forget that, we move too fast and we lose sight of one another and what's possible. I would say we also forget that everybody has something to teach us. We become siloed and overwhelmed. We forget we have access to communities with resources that offer solutions and that could assist us with building a different possibility or world and a different outcome. So this has direct implications for how we lead together. Take team meetings as a very simple example if you're a manager of people. How often are you stopping to ask who has not spoken or whose perspective is missing? So I would say that these are practices of presence. These are design interventions that allow for new voices and therefore outcomes to arise. In hiring, presence looks like slowing down the decision-making process at times, delaying the final call until we've reviewed the process holistically. Did you involve a diverse panel? Did we interrogate our sense of fit? Are you hiring for, somebody that you have that fits the culture versus adds to the culture? Did we give space for different voices in our organization to weigh in? So I'll share a brief example there from my own practice. A client of mine was running an executive search, and halfway through, the team of leaders started to receive a lot of upward feedback that the role scope was not fitting their needs. So what the team needed was a relatable leader that could serve as a mentor in addition to being a revenue multiplier, which is what the leadership team was looking for. So the leaders wanted to push forward as, they were overwhelmed, they needed this new hire as soon as possible, but they chose to pause, they listened, they reconvened their panel, and realigned the job description. They also expanded the candidate slate and their sourcing within that. Critically, they invited non-managers into the process. And not only did that yield a stronger hire, it signaled to the staff that they mattered and that their organization had the capacity to be reflexive and also balance the needs of the business. So presence made redesign possible in the situation. So much of inclusion depends on our capacity to interrupt our default mode or default setting, and to say, wait, before we move forward, let's check the weather, let's notice the climate in the room, and let's see who's missing. Because presence isn't passive, it's a gateway to what is possible. Perfect. So I'm going to talk now about something that's a little bit harder to name, but crucial to acknowledge and something that I'm sure we're all feeling in some way, which is the concept of weathering. So Christina Sharp, who is a professor of Black Studies at York University, writes that the weather is the totality of our environments that emanate from the historical structure of slavery into the present and all of power's mutating and calcified forms. So it becomes the condition of our lives. It's something that makes the history not past tense, but something that is present tense. It's what we move through every day, not as background, but as the very condition of our living and of our work. In the workplace, weathering shows up as fatigue, as withdrawal, as the emotional labor quietly carried by people of color, queer employees, disabled colleagues, or anyone whose identity places them at the margins. These employees are often asked to educate others and to lead DE&I efforts, while also often enduring microaggressions, lack of support, or outright hostility to their efforts. So the message can quickly become, do the work, but bear the cost. But here's the truth. Inclusion that lives in one person or one role is not inclusion, it's fragility posing as progress. Earlier this year, the Greater Portland Immigrant Welcome Center, a crucial hub for new Mainers, was forced to close its doors. The loss was not just organizational, it was communal. It left us bereft of its world-building capabilities. And in that vacuum, it left immigrant families, workers, and partners without a sense of a rival and without infrastructure. So when these system falters, it's coalitional work across communities, sectors, and identities that help us to rebuild. And Christina Sharp's language, who is thinking here and building upon Toni Morrison, this is rememory rather than remembering, which is to say it is holding and reactivating what has been lost and bringing that back together. And we saw something similar in a school district here where a DE&I coordinator had to resign after being the target of hate mail. She had no systemic support, no weatherproofing. She was left to hold that storm alone. If you've ever been the only one in a room or watched someone carry the weight, you know this, the weather follows you home. So what can we do? We build systems that act as shelters. We normalize mental health resources tailored to those doing the emotional labor in these spaces. We can fund affinity spaces to give them formal recognition and recognize their value in the promotional ladder, not just give them lunchtime meetups, although everybody loves a free lunch. We implement internal crisis protocols to protect staff from harassment, both online and off. And most importantly, we shift from symbolic support to more structural forms of support. As I mentioned, that can include qualifying those efforts and including that in the rewards packages that your organizations put together or promotional ladders, et cetera. Because the question isn't, do we have a DE&I lead? It should be, does the system support them? If you can't answer the second question, you probably shouldn't have a DE&I lead yet. When inclusion lives in one role, we build systems that erode people, not support them. So let's choose to build shelter. Let's create climates where people don't have to weather the storm alone. So far we've talked about systems, reimagination, presence, and weathering, but none of this matters if we leave inclusion up to one department. Inclusion isn't a program, it's a practice, and it's a shared practice. It lives in your choices and in the choices in the domains that you influence. And each of us has those domains of influence. So you don't need to be a chief diversity officer to shape culture. If you run payroll, you influence how people experience economic dignity. If you lead hiring, you influence who gets into the room. If you are part of a medical system in the area, you influence how people receive care, ask for care, and have that care translated. If you run operations for a business, you influence how people access the processes and feel about them. So let me ask you this. What systems do you touch? What assumptions live inside those systems? And what can you change? In Maine, we've seen some of the most impactful shifts don't come from grand strategies. They come from everyday professionals choosing to redesign one piece of the system that they control. For example, some HR teams in rural hospitals and nonprofit agencies are now piloting redesigns of their job postings and dropping must-have driver's license from roles where it isn't essential. So why? It's because they listened, they took stock of the population in their area, and they realized that one line was excluding people from applying. Elsewhere, I've seen certain job ladders, especially in the healthcare industry, where the credentialing that is sometimes required, very often required, is bifurcated in very creative ways, allowing people to, creating smaller ladders within a role that gives people the opportunity to do some of the work up to the line where the credentialing is required, and then supporting them to receive that credentialing. So those are just some of the ways that some organizations are approaching this issue. Others have built prompts into their team meetings. They ask, what assumptions are we bringing into the hiring process? And by team meetings, I should say manager meetings. What assumptions do we bring into the hiring process? Or what assumptions are we making about new employees? Did our orientation process actually welcome them or simply inform them? So these are small moves with large implications. They change the authorship of culture and institutional contexts. So here's a practical takeaway. Give every team lead the challenge to redesign one process, one review form, one meeting structure, one hiring step, and then share it. And just to say that it can be any process, right, that involves people. And then share it, name it, normalize it, and normalize redesign as part of everybody's role. Because the goal is not perfection, it's participation. And inclusion thrives when people feel invited rather than instructed. Inclusion doesn't wait for permission. It begins with what you choose to redesign and how you communicate and bring people into that fold. So let's stop waiting for a big fix. Let's write inclusion into the small daily systems that we already own. Okay, big green button. Can I do this? Okay, we've explored a lot together, but I want to zoom out and reframe the space that we're in. So this conference isn't just a list of sessions. It's a summit. It is a summit, that's true. It's a scaffold, a launch pad, and a chance to begin reimagining your systems with intention and to build coalitions with one another. Over the next few days, you'll hear about refugee resettlement, equitable benefits, hiring equity, healthcare pipelines, and more. These are not separate tracks. They're all facets of inclusion by design. If you're attending a seminar or speech on refugee resettlement, let today plant the seed. What would it mean to design for arrival, not to design for assimilation? To create work environments that are structured to welcome, structurally rather than simply sentimentally. If you're in healthcare or rural workforce, I cannot say that word, rural workforce development, think about what onboarding and credentialing looks like in your organization. Are they designed for retention or for trust? Are they designed to simply move fast and check boxes, or to compete with what the people down the road are doing? If you're here to think about inclusive benefits or mental health, think about how your policies acknowledge or ignore chosen family, disability, caregiving, and are you talking with your employees about the current moment? Because I can guarantee that half of them are freaking out. If you're here to think, I already said that, and if you're ready to keep these conversations going beyond this session, tonight is the perfect chance. So at 6 p.m., the talent reception opens. It's a space for professionals from diverse backgrounds to connect directly with employers here at the conference. Exhibitors will be at their booths in the Costco Bay Ballroom ready to meet you, hear your story, and explore opportunities. It's one more way that this conference turns ideas into action by putting people in the same room who can make things happen. So again, everything you do this week is part of design opportunity. And as we close, or as I close, I want to offer you 2 simple action items to make this week stick. Ask yourself, what's one system I touch, whether that's performance reviews, benefits, job ads, hospital, healthcare. If you're in hospitality, it can be the people that come to your location that you can redesign even slightly. Align internally, and before you leave this conference, meet with your leaders or team members and compare notes and set one shared goal. Because inclusion doesn't succeed in silos, it succeeds in alignment and a vision that is great enough to imagine new possibilities. The most successful organizations that I have seen do this work did not have the best mission statements per se. They had the best follow-through because they committed to change together. In summary, inclusion is not a future initiative, it's a present choice. Every system we touch is a chance to redesign for belonging. So let's make this conference the start of that choice, not a pause from it. Thank you so much for your time.